Hi everyone, this is a quick video to go through some frequently sort of commented questions on some of the videos there, and also to say thanks to everyone for subscribing, liking, sharing. It's helping the channel grow, and that means that I'm able to focus on investigating things and explaining things, which is really what I want to do. So here's the questions then. The first one there is the beach self-recovery. That's where I got this vehicle stuck on a sloping beach, and the question there is, look, did you consider using left foot braking to inhibit wheel spin rather than what you did? And well, the answer is no, I didn't, because that's not an effective use to inhibit wheel spin. Now, what happens with a modern vehicle like the Ranger here, it's got brake traction control, and I've got a video on that. Basically, when one wheel starts to spin, the computers start to recognize that, they apply the brakes to that wheel only, and then that sends torque to the other wheel. Now, there is a kind of technique where you have a poor man's traction control, and that is just to ride the brakes of your left foot by applying the throttle with your right foot. With a modern vehicle which has got brake traction control, you don't need to do that. The computers do a way better job than you could ever hope to do that. However, even with that, in a situation like this at slow speeds there, the brake traction control doesn't kick in quick enough, or at least not on the Ranger, so you do need to inhibit wheel spin, and the best way to do that is simply just to come off the throttle so that before the wheels dig in, and then just try again, different line, go back, take a run up, drop tyre pressures, max tracks, whatever the case needs to be there. Now, I do recommend left foot braking for use in hill starts and automatics. So if you're pulling away on a steep hill, hold the vehicle with your left foot on the brake, then put your right foot on the accelerator, bring the revs up, reduce the brake pressure slightly of your left foot till the vehicle is just about moving, and then smoothly come off the brakes of your left foot, increase the throttle of your right foot, and off you go. That's much better than hill start assist systems. All right, so next one is trailer sway. So like the trailer sway video, but what do I recommend if you don't have independent electric brakes? So a quick recap on that. When a trailer sways, that is because the trailer is traveling faster than the tow car, and that's, you get that zigzagging motion behind the vehicle then. So the way to solve that is to make the trailer travel slower than the tow car. And the way to do that is to apply the brakes on the trailer only, but not on the tow car. So the question is, what happens if you can't do that and your brakes are set up so that they're overrun brakes? When the tow car slows down, the trailer basically moves into the back of that, and then that activates the brakes on the trailer. Well, in that case, all I'd say is I hope your insurance is paid up, and the best thing to do is, in fact, as the reader has said, is set the rig up so it doesn't sway in the first place. But if it does, then really what I'd recommend doing is trying to keep the vehicle as straight as you can, which is really, really difficult, and then coming off the accelerator and then just slowing down with engine braking rather than foot braking. The reason I say engine braking is you're less likely to lock the vehicle's wheels there. But yeah, it's really not a great situation to be in trailer sway, particularly when you don't have any means of independently slowing the trailer down. Okay, now this one is first time on a beach. Do tyre pressures depend on the wheel size and tyre conditions, or just the conditions itself? Well, as with all of these questions, you could almost spend an hour answering each one, but let's just quickly run through tyre pressures and different types of profiles tyres. So this graphic here shows briefly the purpose of reducing tyre pressures. So there's 40 psi, the contact patch is that big, 10 psi, and it's now that big. So the reason we reduce tyre pressures on compression surfaces such as sand is because you get less rolling resistance. It's not so much actually greater traction, it's all to do with reducing the rolling resistance, because you float onto the sand as opposed to just dig into it. Anyway, so here are two tyres. Now they're both identical diameter, but one is a low profile rim in the middle, the other's high profile. So let's say that they're both 33-inch diameters, and this might be a 17-inch rim here, and that might be a 21, 2-inch rim. Now you can see that the difference between the two is the sidewall, which is the height from the ground to the wheel, and it's significantly greater with the high profile. Now when we drop tyre pressures, you can see that there's still a bit of sidewall left with the high profile. The low profile is pretty much almost touching the ground. Now you don't want to be touching the ground, because that's where the rim can get damaged, and obviously that's not going to do the wheel any good, or your handling or anything else. So that's why high profile tyres are better off-roading, and also particularly in sand. Now that said, the modern sort of low profile wheel, one of these, And modern low profile tyre is way better than it was a few years ago. You can actually air them down quite low and they do still work, but they're not as good as the high profile tyres that you see there. And part of the reason is that because this rim is closer to the ground, then the low profile tyre needs to have a stiffer sidewall so as to protect that, that rim, whereas the high profile can have a more flexible one and it can air down more easily, wrap itself around obstacles. So you really want to go for the highest profile wheels that you possibly can when you're off-roading. Okay, now what affects it? Well, tyre profile, tyre construction. If you've got a passenger construction tyre, that doesn't have the quite fixed steel sidewall beltings and plies. It doesn't have that sort of construction of a light truck construction tyre. So you typically find that the passenger tyres air down quite nicely. That's one of the reasons they tend to go quite well in sand. And vehicle weight makes a big difference. Well, obviously, the heavier the vehicle, the more it sinks in. So what can you do about setting your vehicle up for sand? Well, first of all, make sure your vehicle's set up. I'll probably do another video on this, but key points for vehicle setup on sand is: one, if you have a centre diff or part-time four-wheel drive system, engage it. Always lock your centre diff in sand, always engage four-wheel drive. But generally, do not bother with cross-axle differential locks because they're only really going to be any good if you're going in a straight line up a scooped out sand dune where people have cross-axled and dug ruts. They're not going to help you to any significant degree when in any other situation. In fact, they'll actually just create drag and increase turning circles. That's not going to work for you. Second one is switch off stability control. You can leave brake traction control on, but stability control should come off along with the related engine traction control, and you can watch another video of mine to see the differences for those. Then use the right techniques. Again, there's a zillion different sand driving techniques. Once you've done that, basically just keep on dropping the tyre pressures until you're able to keep moving. That's your rule of thumb there. Now, the lower you go, the more likely you are to pull a tyre off the rim. So my general rule of thumb is I wouldn't want to go much below about sort of 12, 13. I generally run around 15 in sand. You can go as low as 8, but then you really want to start reducing your speed and making very sure that you don't start to run that tyre off a rim. So a very quick overview to that question there. Next question. This is great information. This is a winch rigging video. Can you put it all in a small paperback book for people to keep in their vehicle? Well, it's amazing. One of the biggest questions I get is, can I actually convert my books to digital form? And I'm working on it. But here I'm saying, okay, I've got digital form. Can you do a book? Well, you know what? I've already done it. Here it is, the four-wheel drive glove box guide. That is in print. It's actually used as a training manual in different training organisations. So you can go to my website and see where you can order that. So, yep, it's already there for you. And there's also a bigger version of this, which goes into a lot more detail, but this is the glove box version. Now, again, back on the beach self-recovery, the question is, are these techniques useful in snow? Really good question, and one I could probably spend an hour talking about, but just briefly. Snow versus ice, both of them are loose compression surfaces, i.e. you stand on them, you can sink down, you can just kick them around with your feet. But only ice is slippery, or snow ice is slippery. So with snow and ice, you can get in a situation where the vehicle just rotating and just sort of helplessly sliding. You'll never get that in sand because you'll just dig in and stop. In fact, you can actually stop quicker in sand from high speed than you can on bitumen because the vehicle just submarines in and just dives in. With sand, there's realistically often no end to it. You start digging down and down and down, and there'll just be nothing but sand until you get to the Earth's core. Whereas snow is pretty much, at some point you dig down, and obviously you can get points where there's just nothing but snow, but very often you dig down and eventually you find a track or the road or whatever it is underneath the snow. And that's actually a big difference. So snow is kind of something which goes across existing tracks, whereas sand is its own terrain. Sand dunes, you do get sand dunes, you can drive up sand dunes. Snow dunes, you don't really get snow dunes, you get sort of snow drift, but you can't really drive up them. But of course you can drive up a track which is covered in snow, but it's still not quite the same there. Now, snow can be really fluffy as well, so you can just batter your way through snow if it's light and fluffy enough. You can't do that on sand. Once you start dragging things like differentials in sand, that's pretty much game over. You then need to dig out or drop pressures or do something else there. So it's quite different from that respect. So there are techniques which do cross over. So the concept of using ruts crosses over. If in any compression surface, be that sand or snow, vehicle's gone through made ruts, then follow it, provided the ruts are appropriate to use, because it will be easier there. Limiting wheel spin in both of them. If you get in a situation where you're manoeuvring slightly, just spin the wheels, and that will just dig the wheel into that loose compression surface, and then that will either get you stuck or make it harder to manoeuvre. Flotation is important, reducing tyre pressures, as I talked about before, and judicious use of momentum can work in both cases as well. So there are crossovers there, but it's not, if you're an experienced snow driver, don't assume all of that carries over to sand, and vice versa, even though some of the techniques are the same. Okay, now next question, again on the beach self-recovery video. So in my experience, the damp sand between the water and the high tide is actually firmer than the loose dry sand up the beach, and as you want to stay on the firm sand, that's where you should be. So you just drive along the firm sand and then get momentum up and go up the beach. Well, what do I think of that technique? The answer is I think it's a perfectly valid technique, and it can work in some situations. Would not have worked here because there just wasn't, it was just too soft to do it, and too risky. And in fact, whilst the sand can be firmer, it can also become quite waterlogged, and that was the case here. So it's actually sort of softer nearer the beach than it is further up. So that rule doesn't always work, but in some cases it can. Now, preview is something I'm working on here, which is my model for beach driving. It's based on the high water mark, and there's different zones of it. The first mark is the water zone. You do not ever want to go in salt water for 1,000 different reasons. You will regret it fairly shortly thereafterwards, and then you will continue to regret it at increasingly frequent intervals for the next 10 years until you put your car under crusher and just be done with it. Salt water is just a really bad idea. Then we've got the damp zone, which is where the water has just been, the waves have just been there, but it's not dried out. And then we've got the dry zone, a bit underneath the high water mark, where there's been no waves for a while, so the sand is quite dry. Above that, you've got a tideless zone where the tide will never actually reach, unless it's a king tide exception or something like that. And then you've got your vegetation zone. Now, you don't want to drive in the vegetation zone either, because that's where you can damage the vegetation, you can disturb nesting birds. It's ecologically very, very unfriendly to do so. You don't drive there, and that leaves you these free. And I'm going to put the vehicle here up in the tideless zone. So again, you can drive in this zone here, and sometimes it makes sense to, provided the traction is firm and there's going to be no danger of slipping down into the water. In that particular situation, I didn't do that because it was pretty much waterlogged sand there, so it was high risk. And there's a danger if you do it, that if you drive along there, because you're at a side angle, then the vehicle starts to slip sideways, and it's going to slip towards danger, towards the water zone. Then you've got to try and do this low tyre pressure turn up a hill, and that's a really good way to rip the tyres off your rim. And I have tried it, and I've been in situations where the vehicle basically crabs downhill as you accelerate, and you're getting closer and closer to the water, and you're thinking, oh God, I really need to turn now. Do I just turn downhill, get some more momentum? Before you know it, you're in the water. So with beach driving, it evolves constantly. There's no one answer for it. All I'm trying to do is give people a bunch of techniques to use, which they can pull out of their hat and just use at an appropriate time and talk through the principles. So not saying no to that, but wasn't appropriate in that. Okay, so next question is, struggling to get advice on accurate information about how a four-wheel drive works. Well, you have come to the right channel. Watch my videos, read my books, it's all there. So this person has got a Pajero Sport, and they want to know which of the 4 different modes they should use. Well, I have the answer for you. So this is off a Pajero, but it's the same thing in the Pajero Sport. The Pajero, by the way, is known as the Montero in North America, and the Shogun in Europe. It's the same vehicle, and the same system also applies to the Pajero IO, otherwise known as the Pinin, and the Mitsubishi Triton, most variants of it anyway, otherwise known as the L200. Anyway, there's 4 modes. There's 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, centre diff unlocked, 4-wheel drive, centre diff locked, and 4-wheel drive, centre diff locked and low range. I recommend you use only the top 3 modes, and this is why. Both of these modes, 2H and 4H, can safely be used on high traction surfaces such as bitumen. The reason is you won't get any transmission wind-up because you've got in effect an open differential in 4H. So why do you drive in 4H? Well, greater traction is the answer, even going around a wet roundabout in a bit of snow or slush, and there's potentially reduced tyre wear as well because you're not putting all of the torque through the back wheels. So why does the 2H mode exist? Well, I don't think it really needs to be honest. There is potentially a marginal fuel saving, but to be honest, most of the transmission's rotating in 4H mode anyway, so it's pretty pointless. I used to own a Pajero. I was a member of a Pajero club, did a lot of training there. No one ever saw any significant fuel saving difference between 2H and 4H. And for me, the benefits of 4H just massively outweigh the 2H. So I just drive them all in 4H all the time on bitumen. Now, when you start to go off-road, that's when you use these other two modes. So 4H locked centre diff, that's when you're off-road and you're moving at about, say, 30-40 k's an hour, too fast for low range. Examples of that would be sand, snow, shallow mud, that sort of thing. And that's 4H locked, and that's when you've got your locked centre diff there, but you're still in high range. Once you're slower than that, below about 30 k's an hour, and that's your hill climbs, your rocks, ruts, that sort of thing, or slow speed sand going very twisty in and out inland sand tracks, that sort of stuff, then that's where you can use low range there. So that's my recommendation and a short explanation of Mitsubishi's SuperSelect system. Okay, so that's the end of the questions. Thanks so much everybody for supporting the channel, and I do have some more people appearing on Patreon now. What I've decided to do as a thank you is just set up regular Zoom calls where I'll just go one-on-one and answer whatever questions I can there, and if necessary pull other people I know in from the industry hopefully to answer questions. So please support me on that. It does help fund the journalism and investigating. So thanks everybody, keep watching and drop comments and I'll respond to them as I can. Thanks, bye.